9:40 a.m., March the 3rd, 1991. After a short 17-minute trip from Denver, United Airlines Flight 585 is on final approach into Colorado Springs. It looks like a perfect day for flying, but there's trouble in the air.
Nice looking day. Hard to believe the skies are unfriendly.
There's been heavy turbulence during the flight, and violent gusts of wind are forecast over Colorado Springs.
Never driven to Colorado Springs and not gotten sick.
At the controls is 52-year-old Captain Harold Green, a pilot with 20 years' experience and a sterling reputation. Green's co-pilot is Patricia Eidson. At 42, she's one of the first female flight officers in United's history.
Flight attendants, prepare for landing.
At Colorado Springs Municipal Airport, Air Traffic Controller James Rayfield is ready to bring Flight 585 in.
United 585, report the airport in sight.
Got it?
Yep.
Airport in sight, United 585.
Lower landing gear.
United 585 is cleared for a visual approach to runway 35. Weather conditions, wind 320 degrees at 16, gusting at 29.
As its speed decreases, Flight 585 becomes more vulnerable to the turbulence. Eidson wants to know what other planes have experienced on landing.
Any reports lately of any loss or gain of airspeed?
Yes, ma'am. 500 feet, a 50-knot loss. At 400 feet, a 50-knot gain. And at 150 feet, a gain of 20 knots.
Sounds adventurous, thank you.
Starting on down.
Less than 3 kilometers from the airport, retired policeman Harold Darnell is on his way to a local flea market. A kilometer overhead, Green and Eidson focus on keeping their speed constant as they descend.
Wait, a 10-knot change here.
Yeah, I know. Awful lot of power to hold that airspeed.
As United 585 approaches the runway, Darnell feels something strange.
Oh, what the heck was that?
Out of nowhere, a powerful gust of wind strikes his vehicle, almost blowing him off the road.
Another 10-knot gain.
3 flaps.
From the control tower, James Rayfield can now see Flight 585's final approach. As the aircraft closes in on the airport, the ride gets even bumpier.
Wow. We're at 1,000 feet.
Then, without warning, the 737 starts to spin out of control.
Oh, God, slip! 15 flaps! 15!
Going up.
Oh, my God!
Oh, my Lord. Crash! Crash!
Rescue workers arrive within minutes, but there's almost no sign of the 737. The shattered remains of the 38-ton jet lie buried in a fire-blackened impact crater.
The plane didn't skate or bounce, you know, like when a plane comes in normally and lands, it just nosed right in, and where it hits, where it stayed.
And I came down here, and this is when I saw all of the, it was horrible.
There are no survivors. All 20 passengers and 5 crew members are killed instantly by the high-speed impact and exploding jet fuel. In 10 violent seconds, Colorado Springs has become the site of one of the most mysterious air crashes in aviation history. By nightfall, investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board descend on Colorado Springs. Known to insiders as tin kickers, NTSB investigators examine over 2,000 aviation accidents a year, at times by picking through the metal debris of fallen aircraft. While coroners mark the location of human remains in red, NTSB investigators mark scraps of metal in yellow, looking for clues to help them solve the mystery of Flight 585. Like investigating a mass murder, it's a tough job walking onto a crash site. Among the investigators assigned to the case is Malcolm Brenner, a specialist in human performance. His job will be to find out if the crash was caused by pilot error.
The area was cordoned off by police, and there were Salvation Army trucks. I got a cup of coffee, a cup of hot chocolate or something, and I thanked them for it, and they said, "No, no, thank you." And they had this look in their eyes like, "My God, you have to go into this site."
Clues to the fate of United 585 lie mangled in a deep black hole. The fuselage is crushed like an accordion in the impact crater. The rest of the plane is in pieces spread over an area smaller than a football field.
There was a lot of fire damage. There had been a fire afterwards, and it was all contained in a relatively small area, which just initial impression, it can be a sign that the airplane was intact. If there was a mid-air explosion or something came off the airplane, you'd expect that to be a much larger site.
My first sense that it was going to take some time to investigate the accident was the damage that we saw in the parts. When they're burnt and broken, the process always takes longer.
But with their work just beginning, members of the NTSB have no clue that the case of United 585 will become the longest crash investigation in aviation history. A clear late winter day in 1991 turned deadly in just 10 short seconds. Moments from landing in Colorado Springs, United Airlines Flight 585 fell out of the sky at 370 kilometers per hour.
Crash! Crash!
All 20 passengers and 5 crew members died. The National Transportation Safety Board begins a painstaking investigation into the crash. Engine turbines, hydraulic pressure gauges, the cockpit voice recorder, and in-flight data recorder are all carefully extracted from the site, photographed, and sent to the lab for analysis. An important first step in the investigation is the analysis of the cockpit voice recorder. With pilot error a factor in 70% of air disasters, Malcolm Brenner's job is to see what role pilots Green and Eidson played in the crash.
This crew was, and I felt this at the time, was one of the more impressive crews that I'd ever dealt with. There was a little bit of tension release, a little bit of humor. The captain said,
Never driven to Colorado Springs and not gotten sick?
The first officer suggested that they add extra speed as a safety margin. The captain agreed with it. It was good interaction.
Got it?
Yep.
Airport in sight, United 585.
Lower landing gear.
This is a sense of an excellent crew caught randomly, if anything. So again, that was my first impression, is that this would be consistent more with a hardware situation.
As more about Flight 585 becomes known, mechanical failure becomes a serious suspect. Just seconds before it crashed, the plane rolled onto its back and spun wildly out of control. Investigators wonder if the sudden motion was caused by the plane losing an engine or a wing. From the state of the aircraft on site, it's clear that it was intact at the time of the crash. What investigators don't know is if the engines were still working at impact. Technicians examined the engine turbines. They discovered dirt has been drawn deeply into every crevice. These blades were clearly spinning and sucking in air at the time of impact. The engines may have been running, but technicians aren't sure how well. The plane's hydraulic pressure dials are destroyed, their glass covers broken. The indicator needles have been snapped off by the force of the impact, but even these ravaged dials tell a tale.
15 flaps! 15!
On close inspection, investigators find a critical mark. At the moment of impact, a dent was made on the faceplate by the jarred indicator needle. It proves that when United 585 crashed, its engines were running normally. With engine failure ruled out, there seems to be only one other mechanical explanation for why 585 suddenly rolled over and then fell out of the sky. It appears increasingly likely that the plane had suffered a catastrophic problem with its flight controls. Investigators quickly become suspicious of the rudder at the back of the tail.
We focused in after eliminating other flight control surfaces that we thought could contribute to the roll. We started looking at the rudder.
Bring that up so I can take a look at it.
Investigators begin their examination of the rudder on site, but the violence of the crash makes the job extremely difficult.
Almost nothing left.
Most of the plane's parts are too crushed or burned for testing, but a vital component is still reasonably intact. The Power Control Unit, or PCU. Used constantly during flight, especially during landings, the PCU performs like a car's power steering. When the pilot pushes on a rudder pedal, the PCU uses hydraulic fluid to convert gentle movements of a pilot's foot into the pressure needed to move the 737's enormous rudder. The heart of the PCU is something called the dual servo valve. Shaped like a soda can, it has two slides which glide past one another, directing the flow of pressurized hydraulic fluid that moves the rudder.
This servo valve is very unique, that it is, in effect, two valves in one, and that creates a whole range of interactions that don't occur in a more conventional hydraulic valve.
When a technician opens the power control unit, chips of metal are found floating in the hydraulic fluid. It's a disturbing find. These particles could cause the servo valve to jam, making it impossible to work the plane's rudder. It's a chilling prospect. Could a microscopic fault bring down a 38-ton jet? It's difficult for Phillips to tell. While more intact than much of the wreck, the PCU and dual servo valve are both damaged.
The airplane crashed and burnt in a pretty confined area, and there was a lot of damage to the flight control components and the things we were testing and needed to test and look at. The more damaged the components are, the harder it is to take measurements and do functional testing.
To test what he does have, Phillips travels to California, to the labs of Parker Hannifin, where the rudder control unit is made. The curious metal chips floating in the PCU's chambers are dismissed. Phillips is told that filters keep them out of the delicate servo valve that directs fluid and moves the rudder. Nothing else is found that could explain any sudden movement of the rudder on Flight 585.
We didn't have any absolute indication or information that we could point to that said the rudder power control unit, the servo valve, or any part of that flight control system caused that accident.
Phillips still suspects a mechanical problem, but with no conclusive evidence that the PCU or servo valve caused the crash, he's forced to sign off on the tests.
It's a pass.
With Phillips at a dead end, only bad mountain weather remains as a primary suspect. An expert on weather-related aviation accidents, Greg Salatolo is trying to determine if heavy winds on the day of the crash were a factor.
There is a history of events where there have been airplane accidents attributed to mountain waves or rotors. In 1966, a BOAC 707 near Mount Fuji disintegrated in a mountain wave and rotor.
High winds crashing over mountain peaks leave so-called wind rotors in the lee side. Invisible, highly turbulent downdrafts that come plunging down with devastating power and are extremely dangerous to aircraft.
We found a great deal of evidence looking at the surface upper air data and talking to witnesses in the area that rotors were a possibility.
An explosion, it was right over there.
Salatolo hears several eyewitness reports of bizarre mountain weather on the day of the crash. One of the most intriguing is from Harold Darnell,
Oh, what the heck was that?
whose truck was struck by a powerful gust of wind just moments before 585 crashed. But as Greg Salatolo combs through his evidence, the theory that a wind rotor knocked the plane from the sky is getting less and less likely.
Nice looking day. Hard to believe the skies are unfriendly.
Wind rotors are areas of extremely low barometric pressure. So if Flight 585 did pass through one, its altimeter reading would have spiked as the plane was blown suddenly upwards.
There was no evidence that we saw that on the flight data recorder of 585.
What the flight recorder did show was a fast and deadly drop in altitude as the plane fell to Earth. It's been 21 months since the investigation into the crash of United Flight 585 began. Almost 2 years in which the NTSB has studied the crew, the weather, the rudder, and thousands of other pieces of evidence. They've come up empty-handed. For only the 4th time in its history, the NTSB releases a report which doesn't reach a conclusion. The cause of the crash of Flight 585 is undetermined.
We had put a lot of time and effort into the investigation, and we just weren't sure what had happened.
It was like he was tracking a serial killer. He was frustrated that they had not solved 585. He did not want that to happen again.
But almost 2 years after the report on 585 is released, the killer strikes again. At 7 p.m. on a clear, windless day, US Air Flight 427 is nearing Pittsburgh. Captain Peter Germano and First Officer Chuck Emmett are getting ready for their final approach.
Folks, from the flight deck, we should be on the ground about 10 more minutes. Sunny skies, a little hazy. Flight attendants, please prepare for landing. I ask you to check the security of your seatbelt. Thank you.
US Air 309, descend and maintain 6,000.
As they close in on the airport, the pilots are on the lookout for another flight about 10 kilometers ahead of them.
Looking for the traffic. turning 100, US Air 427.
I see the jet stream.
As they pass through the turbulence left behind by the other flight, their jet suddenly and alarmingly rolls left.
Hold on, hold on. Hold on. Shoot!
Nothing the pilots do seems to have any effect.
What the hell is this? What the? Go! Shoot! God. Oh, God. 427, emergency! Oh, shoot. Oh! Oh, God! Oh, God, no!
Rescue crews arrive quickly, but the fate of Flight 427 is tragically clear. There's no hope for the 132 passengers and crew. The human carnage is so bad, authorities declare the crash site a biohazard.
US Air 427 accident was the first US accident where biohazard suits were used, and it made it more difficult. They were uncomfortable, they were hot, and to this day, when I put on a pair of rubber gloves, for any reason, I'm instantly transformed back to the site in Pittsburgh.
Captain John Cox, a 737 pilot and a flight systems specialist with the Airline Pilots Association, is asked to join the team investigating the crash of Flight 427. As coroners attempt to collect human remains, NTSB lead investigator Tom Houter already knows his hunt for clues will be long and painstaking.
When we first arrived at the crash site, well, first of all, there was no aircraft there. There were only bits and pieces of the airplane. It wasn't really recognizable as an airplane.
With the help of eyewitnesses, information from the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, investigators begin to quickly see some striking similarities between 427 and the unsolved case of United 585. In fact, they seem to be mirror images of each other. On final approach, United 585 rolls right, while US Air 427 rolls to the left.
Oh, God, Fred! Hang on.
Both crews are caught by surprise, and after just a few terrifying seconds, both aircraft plummet straight into the ground.
Certainly the whole team was aware of the previous accident with United 585 in Colorado Springs. We try to keep that in the back of our minds and take a look at this one as to what it presents to us.
As the investigation continues, the list of similarities grows. 427's engines were also attached and functioning at the time of impact. But for all the similarities, there's one important difference. Unlike United 585, as US Air 427 approached Pittsburgh, weather conditions were dead calm.
Folks from the flight deck, we should be on the ground about 10 more minutes. Sunny skies, a little hazy.
Taking a look at the flight data recorder information, the aircraft's approaching Pittsburgh. It's an extremely smooth night. There's just no turbulence at all. The pilots are relaxed. They're talking about the landing.
Flight attendants, please prepare for landing. I ask you to check the security of your seatbelts. Thank you.
As he did in the case of United 585, Greg Phillips will once again lead the investigation into the mechanical aspects of the crash. Almost immediately, he makes a promising discovery. Miraculously, much of US Air 427's tail and rudder appear intact. The hydraulic devices inside the tail have also sustained very little damage. Phillips and Houter prepare to send the parts to the manufacturer, Parker Hannafin, for testing as soon as possible. They need answers. Pressure on the NTSB to solve the accident is growing quickly. Not only are the crashes of flights 585 and 427 disturbingly similar, both of them involve the same kind of airplane, a Boeing 737. But with serious questions being raised about the plane's safety, billions of dollars, and perhaps the airline industry itself, are at risk.
We couldn't live with the fact as investigators of having 2 unsolved 737 accidents. The airplane is in too much use, too wide a use around the world. It carries too many people every day. Unsolved was not an acceptable answer.
If 427 was an undetermined accident, we could not find the cause of this accident, there was a great chance that if there was a third accident with the 737 fleet under similar circumstances, that the 737 fleet would have been grounded.
Careful with it.
The investigation into the crash of Flight 427 may be the most important in the history of the NTSB. But it won't be easy. Answers are still years away.